Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This is a Little Blue Book. It is Little Blue Book number 171, and it is titled, Has Life Any Meaning? A Debate between Frank Harris and Percy Ward. This debate took place on Sunday, April 11th, 1920, in Kimball Hall, Chicago. This is part 2. And we begin on page 11 with Frank Harris's first speech. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I noticed that your chairman emphasized the restriction of the 35 minutes speech. Just a hint to me not to go further. I proposed to Mr. Percy Ward, when he told me the usual sequence of things in such a debate as this, I proposed to him to limit the speeches to 10 minutes each, and let us have an intimate talk about the matter. In set speeches we don't get near each other, minds don't touch in such a way. When Mr. Percy Ward begins by telling you that life is not worth living and that God is either mad or bad, I have only old Cato's answer for him. He said, "There are 50 easy ways out of this life." He is a coward who complains about it. Mr. Percy Ward believes in death, final and complete, absolute rest from all our troubles. He can get it in half a minute. He comes here and tells you that he is tired of being here, and that anybody who sent him here is a fool or an ass, that God is a lunatic, and all the rest of it. What has it all to do with Percy Ward? He can end it in a minute. He is the master of his fate, the captain of his soul. As to me, I am not tired of it all. All this pessimism is absolutely silly as well as bad. It is not true and discouraging to boot. Goethe, the greatest thinker in the modern world, says, "Keep your doubts, your fears, your pessimism to yourself." I have enough doubts and fears of my own. But if you have any hope, if you have any encouragement to give men in this world, then give them, and you will become a benefactor to your kind. It seems to me that it is impossible to discuss this matter. It is so simple. We, all of us, by living every day, disprove this gentleman's argument. So all I have to do is to sit and look at him and grin. I don't see any possible argument in it. He quotes Shakespeare to you. Let me also quote him to you. He says, "There is divinity that shapes our ends. Rough hew them as we will." Mr. Percy Ward would change that. He would say, "There is a divinity that shapes our ends rough. Hew them as we will." This new reading, I must confess, was first suggested to me by Mr. Percy Ward himself. He tells you that science has predicted that the sun will disappear, the moon is an object of contempt. The pity of it. I wonder, has he ever gone with a girl for a walk on a moonlit night? I cannot begin to talk about this pessimistic nonsense. My friend Mr. Percy Ward tells us that the end of all being is constant suffering and pain. Schopenhauer says so. Well, Schopenhauer was a great philosopher, a real thinker. I don't know what was the matter with him. You know, he also talked about the fair sex. He referred to them as that undersized, narrow-shouldered, broad-hipped, short-legged race, and scoffed at their beauty. With that belief, I can understand Schopenhauer saying, "This is a vale of tears." But I have not that conception. I have known beauty, perfectly beautiful girls, figures again and again more lovely than any sculptor's dreams. Thank God. And I want to say that for the kisses of one of them I would endure all this horrible misery all over again. And I am 20 years older than my friend Mr. Ward. The argument is this. Because you cannot sit down to the feast of life and enjoy it forever, from eternity to eternity, it is not worth beginning. But have we stomachs to go on with through eternity? I am satisfied with my 60 or 70 years of the feast, completely. I have enjoyed it all, every bit of it, even to the drawing of the curtain at the end. I have enjoyed it all, and and I would cheerfully go through it all again. How cheerfully! When Mr. Percy Ward gets to 60, I hope he will begin to realize how cheerfully he would be 16 again instead of 60. Mr. Ward tells you that the sun contracts 2 feet 7 inches every 100 years or something. I don't know what. He tells you that scientists assert that the sun is contracting steadily. A few years ago, the world was almost shocked by the discovery that one little atom, called radium, gives off heat and gives off light continuously, without diminution of the original substance, and scientists have begun to remodel all their talk about the sun losing its heat, light, and all the rest of it. I want you to keep in mind a single verse that Mr. Percy Ward quoted. It is from Shakespeare. These are actors. As I foretold you, we're all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. Who shall set a limit to what this spirit of man can do? Hardly have we crossed the last continent and mapped out Central Africa when we are able to voyage through air spaces infinitely larger than the whole of our planet, and able to go down under the seas as well. Two new worlds to explore. There is no limit to the unconquerable spirit of man. Then Mr. Percy Ward tells you about this little worm man, about this little span of life, and all the rest of it. I prefer to look on his achievements rather than his limitations. Look at what man has done already. Such and such an astronomer and mathematician discovers and proves that because of the aberrations in one star there must be a great world near it, whirling around, burned out in icy darkness, the weight of which deflects this star from its proper course. He determines the size of that burned out planet and everything about it, and it has never been seen by human eyes. And at the same time another astronomer was doing exactly the same thing and arriving at exactly the same result. Think of proving the existence of something that has never been seen. A thought in the mind of this atom man is a law governing the furthest star. Auguste Comte, the philosopher, said in 1849 or 1850 that there were two things that would never be discovered. The one was the origin of life, the other the chemical composition of the stars. A couple of years later, two German students, awful Huns, two German students were working together in their laboratory, passing oxygen, passing hydrogen through a prism, and catching the various colors on a white sheet. They found out that the various elements gave different colors. Hydrogen, for instance, showed a wavy black line. They were extremely interested. Kirchhoff, one of the students, said to the other, "Bunsen, we'd better go to Lear's cafe or we'll not get anything to eat." He pulled on his coat sleeve and started. Bunsen put down the prism on the windowsill, and they went to lunch. When they came back, Kirchhoff said, "Who has been here? Somebody has put the wavy hydrogen line on the sheet of ours." Bunsen replied, "Nobody could get in. I had the key with me. What does it mean?" They looked at the sheet a minute and could not make it out. Suddenly Bunsen reached for his prism, and the wavy line disappeared. The two students looked at each other. They had discovered the chemical composition of the stars. It was the dying sunlight coming through the prism and writing the hydrogen line on the sheet. The chemical composition of the stars had been discovered, though a few years before Comte had said it could never be discovered by man. Mr. Percy Ward would put a limit to our unconquerable spirits. Think of what we have come from. Think of the little chattering ape that is only 200,000 or 300,000 years away from us. See her, with her little jealousies and all the rest of it, and the little bit of mother love that is going to come and redeem all of it and change it all. The little hint of love in her that is so full of promise for the future that some of us can live on the promise alone and forecast a glorious future from our sunless past. Mr. Percy Ward refers to eternal life. He wants the banquet to go on forever. I believe that death is the end. Here is another passage from Shakespeare about it. Men must endure. Their going hence even as their coming hither. Ripeness is all. Ripeness is all. It is a very good object to put before men, of to come to ripeness, the full power of your faculties. Excellent. A good thing that Mr. Percy Ward has left out of his conclusion. But there is still a better one, perhaps the deepest meaning in life. The deepest thing in life is not happiness. The deepest thing is growth. To come more and more into kin with the greatest who have thought and felt in the past, to feel oneself on a level with the best, to stand, as Keats put it, on the forehead of the time to come, with the thoughts of 5,000 years on our minds and in our souls, and all the hopes and sweet feelings they have caused, a forecast of the joys that those who come after us are going to taste. For joy is growing in the domain of darkness shrinking. I would like to talk to you, if I could, about the Holy Spirit of man, and about the Superman who will come, must come. What does it matter to us what God is, if we can make ourselves gods? All the ideas of love, of wisdom, of self-restraint and self-control can be here materialized in our lives. Why do you complain when you can make yourselves gods? Why don't you rise to the limits of your powers? What is this man talking about? That you cannot do this thing or the other. You cannot live forever. He does not even know the relativity of space and time. You can live like a god for a night. Crowd in great thoughts and feelings, enjoy the throbbing flood of love, and see if it is not endless to you, all the eternity you want, Goethe says. Time is our inheritance, how lordly, wide, and broad. Have you ever tried to live a day as greatly as you could, as richly as you could, as nobly as you could? When I look out on Chicago, one of the ugliest cities in the world, I don't think you have, because if you lived noble lives for one day, you wouldn't be able to stand Chicago. But there is one beautiful view in Chicago, on Wabash Avenue, looking north to the auditorium. A noble building, strangely out of place in Chicago, evidently made by a great man, a great spirit, Louis Sullivan. I stopped there, staring and wondering at the pity of it, the other afternoon, and not a person stopped with me. All Percy Wards, don't you know, complaining of being tired because they run up and down. And today again I stopped and looked at it, the endless long lines of it, leading the soul up and up into the blue. Louis Sullivan, a great living soul among you, you ought to be proud of it. The argument that life cannot have a meaning because death is the end, that there can be no joy because the joy is not going on forever, I cannot answer such piffle. Then Mr. Ward adduces the argument that because the dominant law of life is the struggle for existence, therefore it is no good. But out of the struggle for existence comes progress. He didn't tell you that. This is the end and object of the struggle for existence. Progress. Growth. The little apes evolving higher and higher and higher through his ferocious struggle to get to be men. Out of the struggles have evolved the different races, all getting better and better, all getting wiser and wiser, all getting more and more humane. For after all, what is civilization but the humanization of men in society? We are trying to make the ape human. I answer Mr. Percy Ward's first argument about the hatefulness of death with some verses from Swinburne. From too much love of living, from hope and fear set free, we thank with brief thanksgiving, whatever gods may be, that no life lives forever, that dead men rise up never, that even the weariest river wins somewhere safe to sea. Then star nor sun shall waken, nor any change of light, nor sound of water shaken, nor any sound or sight, nor wintry days nor vernal, nor days nor things diurnal, only the sleep eternal in the eternal night. I would like to quote you, too, Walt Whitman's poem on death. I would like to quote to you Walt Whitman's poem on death, beneficent death, but it is too long. Then you must all remember the beautiful phrase, I think it is in the Bible, He giveth his beloved sleep. But the dominant law of life is a struggle for existence. and it is very dreadful for the lowest planes of life. It is ennobling, however, for all, because the end of it is progress, growth, development into something better. This is my reply to Percy Ward's second argument. Mr. Ward's third argument is that the chief experience of every living thing is pain and suffering from the cradle to the grave. All I can do is to shrug my shoulders and say, for God's sake, get out of it. I wouldn't endure 50 or 60 years of suffering. I notice one funny thing about myself. It may be an experience of yours. Looking back over my life, I find that it is the memories of joy and love and delight that remain with me. The suffering I cannot remember. I cannot call back a pang to save my soul. My memories go back to the days when I kissed the first girl. My God, I remember them one after the other, like a chaplet of pearl beads, and at night I count them over and over again, my soul bowed in adoration of the girls who have given me such kindness and love, and of the men who have given me such friendship and such companionship. I got it on all sides. This desperate struggle for existence. Why, my God, am I the only lucky dog? I tell you, you are all pretty lucky, or else you would not be here. And I think we'll end there because Percy Ward's second speech comes up next. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in part 3.